This is a review of dot products. Earlier we discovered that there are two different ways to multiply vectors together. In one way we produce a scalar, which is the dot product. The other way we produce a vector, which is the cross product. Here we're only going to worry about the dot products. And there are two ways to compute a dot product. If you know the components of the two vectors, you simply multiply the components together and add them. So you multiply the x components together and add them to the product of the y components. On the other hand, if you do know the two vectors and you know their magnitude and direction, we can get the angle in between them, which we'll call theta, and the dot product is the magnitude of the first vector times the magnitude of the second vector times the cosine of the angle in between them. It is important to remember that this theta is the angle between the two vectors. It is not the angle for either vector. Now, what does the dot product mean? In one case, we can see this as how much of the two vectors are they parallel to each other, or how much of vector B is parallel to vector A, or vice versa, how much of vector A is parallel to vector B. A second way is to interpret the sign of the dot product to tell us whether or not the two vectors are pointing in the same direction. The dot product is positive, they're more or less parallel to each other, and the angle between them is between 0 and 90 degrees. On the other hand, if the dot product is negative, they are sort of anti-parallel to each other, or they point in opposite directions so that the angle between them is large, it's somewhere between 90 and 180 degrees. If the dot product is exactly 0, that means the two vectors must be perpendicular to each other, or their angle between them is 90 degrees. Now let's do some simple calculations. In the first case, I will give you two vectors, A and B. I want you to pause the video for a moment and calculate the dot product and the angle in between them. It's worthwhile to pause the video right now and actually calculate the dot product and find the angle in between them. Once you've done that, we can see that the dot product is just 2 times 4 plus minus 3 times 5, and that gives us minus 7. So the dot product is minus 7. Angle in between them can be found by taking the inverse cosine of the dot product divided by the magnitude of the two vectors, simply taking the definition of the dot product and solving for the angle. That means I take the dot product, which we already found is minus 7, 3.6 and 6.4 are the magnitudes of the two vectors, and that gives us the angle in between them is 108 degrees, which makes sense because the angle is greater than 90 degrees because the dot product is negative. On the second example, I have a picture here where one vector has a magnitude of 4, the other vector has a magnitude of 3, and the angle in between them is 45 degrees. Again, pause for a moment and calculate the dot product of A and B. Now the dot product is simply the magnitude of A, which is 4, times the magnitude of B, which is 3, times the cosine of 45 degrees. Multiply that all out, and we get 8.49 as the dot product.